Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, boys and girls. Today is Thursday, April 22nd. And as you can see on the board behind me, today we're going to be reading Harry Potter chapter 13. Wow, believe it or not, we're only going to have a handful of chapters left after this one. So let's go ahead and jump straight in. Alright, so our Do Now asks us to please write down our homework, write down our classwork, and you can see your homework and your classwork is right here. Today we're reading chapter 13 and we're completing a set of notes of our choice. We're going to do that on page 67. So let's scroll right down through our table of contents and you'll see that page right here, page 67, is going to be our chapter 13 notes. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and jump straight in. Okay, you guys know the directions, so let me just review them. You're going to go to page 42 in your ELA notebook. You're going to select what style of notes that you want to do for this chapter, and then you're going to go to the very next page in your ELA notebook, and you're going to begin to set those up. So, here I am. I've already set my notes up for today, but I'm going to jump back here. Okay, to page 42, and I'm going to choose the note-taking strategy that I'd like to try today. Last chapter I did some Cornell notes, so I think for this chapter, a good one would be a timeline. That would be a good one to do for this. Post-it notes are always good. Webs are good, so are lists. So I'm going to make my decision. You make your decision. If you need to, pause the video. Go ahead, pause the video, decide what you want to do. And then come on back here to this page and go ahead and begin setting up your notes. Remember, we always set our notes up with these three things. The date, which you can see here, it is April 22nd. The title, which this is Chapter 13, The Very Secret Diary. And the page number, this is page 67 in your notebook. So go ahead, take a moment, make that decision about your notes. Make the effort to set up your notebook page with all three of those things. And then once you are done, we will be ready to review chapter 12 and then jump right into the chapter 13 reading. Okay, so now that you have your notes set up for today's reading, it's important that before we start reading Chapter 13, The Very Secret Diary, we take a moment to just review our notes, and we'll review the events from the last chapter. All right, and so again, the two places I like to go to are in my notes, but even more importantly, I like to go right into my summary, because the summary really does a good job at making sure I know all the important things that happened. So to review my summary from the last chapter, you can see here my main idea. It is now Christmas time at Hogwarts, and Harry, Ron, and Hermione finally drink the Polyjuice Potion. So remember, that's kind of the overriding big idea of the last chapter. They drank the Polyjuice Potion. Harry, Ron, and Hermione, they finished the potion, and then they drank it one night while most of the students are home for the holiday. To be specific, they actually drank it on Christmas night. Using the Polyjuice Potion, Harry and Ron get into the Slytherin common room with Draco, disguised as Crabbe and Goyle. And Draco reveals that when the chamber was opened 50 years ago, someone died. Harry and Ron race back to see Hermione, and they found out that she is partially turned into a cat, and they are going to take her to the hospital wing. So they did learn that the person opening the chamber was not Draco. They learned that Draco is not the heir of Slytherin. It's not him who has been doing the attacks. And the last thing I did was I reflected, of course. I wonder if all that hard work with the Polyjuice Potion was a waste. They didn't really learn that much new, and Harry could still simply tell a teacher about the voice, which is what I think he should do. So there's our review of Chapter 12. So now we're ready to jump into Chapter 13, which is called The Very Secret Diary. Okay, so you can see here, I have my book. I've got some great discussion questions already written for us to talk about today and tomorrow. So let's go ahead, open up your books now to Chapter 13. It begins on page 289. And as I read aloud, you guys follow along with me. All right, chapter 13. Poor Hermione is a cat. Ron and Harry had just found out that the heir was not Draco, and so now, of course, I'm left wondering what they should do next. So let's go ahead and begin chapter 13, and let's see what they do next. Hermione remained in the hospital wing for several weeks. There was a flurry of rumor about her disappearance when the rest of the school arrived back from their Christmas holidays, because, of course, everyone thought that she had been attacked. So many students filed past the hospital wing trying to catch a glimpse of her that Madame Pomfrey took out her curtains again and placed them around Hermione's bed to spare her the shame of being seen with a furry face. Excuse me. Harry and Ron went to visit her every evening. When the new term started, they brought her each day's homework. "If I'd a sprouted whiskers, I'd take a break from work," said Ron, tipping a stack of books onto Hermione's bedside table one evening. "Don't be silly, Ron. I've got to keep up," said Hermione briskly. Her spirits were greatly improved by the fact that all of the hair had gone from her face, and her eyes were turning slowly back to brown. "I don't suppose you've got any new leads," she added in a whisper, so that Madame Pomfrey couldn't hear her. "Nothing," said Harry gloomily. "I was sure it was Malfoy," said Ron for about the 100th time. "What's that?" asked Harry, pointing to something gold sticking out from under Hermione's pillow. "Oh, just a get well card," said Hermione hastily, trying to poke it out of sight. But Ron was too quick for her. He pulled it out, flicked it open, and read aloud. "To Miss Granger, wishing you a speedy recovery. From your concerned teacher, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award." Ron looked at Hermione, disgusted. "You sleep with this under your pillow?" But Hermione was spared answering by Madame Pomfrey sweeping over with her evening dose of medicine. "Is Lockhart the smarmiest bloke you've ever met, or what?" Ron said to Harry as they left the infirmary. Now that word smarmy reminds me, what do we do when we come to unfamiliar words? We underline them. So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to underline the smarmiest. Snape had given them so much homework. Harry thought he was likely to be in the 6th year before he finished it. Ron was just saying he wished he had asked Hermione how many rat tails you were supposed to add to a hair-raising potion, when an angry outburst from the floor above reached their ears. "That's Filch," Harry muttered as they hurried up the stairs and paused, out of sight, listening hard. "You don't think someone else has been attacked?" said Ron tensely. They stood still, their heads inclined toward Filch's voice, which sounded quite hysterical. "Even more work for me, mopping all night, like I haven't got enough to do. No, this is the final straw. I'm going to Dumbledore." His footsteps receded along the out-of-sight corridor, and they heard a distant door slam. They poked their heads around the corner. Filch had clearly been manning his usual lookout post. They were once again on the spot where Mrs. Norris had been attacked. They saw at a glance what Filch had been shouting about. A great flood of water stretched over half the corridor, and it looked as though it was still seeping from under the door of Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Now that Filch had stopped shouting, they could hear Myrtle's wails echoing off the bathroom walls. "Now what's up with her?" Now, this would be a good time for you to stop and add something to your notes about Hermione. Think, Hermione's been in the hospital wing. Harry and Ron go to visit her every night. And, of course, they're still trying to figure out the solutions to who is the heir of Slytherin. So, again, in my notes, I've taken some time to go ahead and add a couple of things. So, you right now, pause the video, add a couple of bullets to your notes. Okay, very bottom of page 291. "Now what's up with her?" said Ron. "Let's go and see," said Harry, and holding their robes over their ankles, they stepped through the great wash of water to the door bearing its out-of-order sign, ignored it as always, and entered. Moaning Myrtle was crying, if possible, louder and harder than ever before. She seemed to be hiding down her usual toilet. It was dark in the bathroom because the candles had been extinguished in the great rush of water that had left both walls and floors soaking wet. "What's up, Myrtle?" said Harry. "Who is that?" glugged Myrtle miserably. "Come to throw something else at me?" Harry waded across to her stall and said, "Why would I throw something at you?" "Don't ask me," Myrtle shouted, emerging with a wave of yet more water, which splashed onto the already sopping floor. "Here I am, minding my own business, and someone thinks it's funny to throw a book at me." "But it can't hurt you if someone throws something at you," said Harry reasonably. "I mean, it'd just go right through you, wouldn't it?" He had said the wrong thing. Myrtle puffed herself up and shrieked, "Let's all throw books at Myrtle because she can't feel it. 10 points if you can get it through her stomach. 50 points if it goes through her head. Well, ha ha ha! What a lovely game. I don't think. Who threw it at you anyway?" asked Harry. "I don't know. I was just sitting in the U-bend, thinking about death, and it fell right through the top of my head," said Myrtle, glaring at them. "It's over there. It got washed out." Harry and Ron looked under the sink where Myrtle was pointing. A small, thin book lay there. It had a shabby black cover and was as wet as everything else in the bathroom. Harry stepped forward to pick it up, but Ron suddenly flung out an arm to hold him back. "What?" said Harry. "Are you crazy?" said Ron. "It could be dangerous." "Dangerous?" said Harry, laughing. "Come off it. How could it be dangerous?" "You'd be surprised," said Ron, who was looking apprehensively at the book. "Some of the books the ministry has confiscated. Dad's told me. There was one that burned your eyes out, and everyone who read Sonnets of a Sorcerer spoke in limericks for the rest of their lives. And some old witch in Bath had a book that you could never stop reading. You just had to wander around with your nose in it, trying to do everything one-handed. And, all right, I've got the point," said Harry. The little book lay on the floor, nondescript and soggy. "Well, we won't find out unless we look at it," he said, and he ducked around Ron and picked it up off the floor. Harry saw at once that it was a diary, and the faded year on the cover told him it was 50 years old. He opened it eagerly. On the first page he could just make out the name, T.M. Riddle, in smudged ink. "Hang on," said Ron, who had approached cautiously and was looking over Harry's shoulder. "I know that name. T.M. Riddle got an award for special services to the school 50 years ago." "How on earth do you know that?" said Harry in amazement. "Because Filch made me polish his shield about 50 times in detention," said Ron resentfully. "That was the one I burped slugs all over. If you'd wipe slime off of a name for an hour, you'd remember it too." Harry peeled the wet pages apart. They were completely blank. There wasn't the faintest trace of writing on any of them. Not even Auntie Mabel's birthday or dentist 3:30. "He never wrote in it," said Harry, disappointed. "I wonder why someone wanted to flush it away," said Ron curiously. Harry turned to the back cover of the book and saw the printed name of a variety store on Vauxhall Road, London. "He must have been Muggle-born," said Harry thoughtfully, "to have bought a diary from Vauxhall Road." "Well, it's not much use to me," said Ron. He dropped his voice. 50 points if you can get it through Myrtle's nose." Harry, however, pocketed it. Okay, now would be a good time for you to stop and write something down in your notes. Think about what happened. Moaning Myrtle, somehow her bathroom is flooded. Harry and Ron go in to investigate, and they find a diary from 50 years ago that belongs to T.M. Riddle. And again, it's important, whenever you guys have names, don't say they found a diary. Harry and Ron found a diary. And don't just say that they found a diary. They found a diary that belongs to T.M. Riddle. You want to make sure that you are being specific with your notes. I've seen a lot of notes that are just very general. They don't include characters' names. Here we have a new name. These have to go in your notes. That way on quizzes and when you go to write summaries, you're not searching back and forth through the chapter to try to find out how to spell a name or what was that character's name. You have it in your notes, okay? Your notes, you don't want to write everything down in your notes, okay? But you want to be specific, okay? So in my notes right now, I would be writing that there is a flood in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom because somebody threw a book at her. Harry and Ron go to investigate, and Harry and Ron find a diary that belongs to T.M. Riddle. Okay, and now I'm going to continue to read on page 295. Hermione left the hospital wing, de-whiskered, tailless, and fur-free, at the beginning of February. Now remember, they drank the Polyjuice potion on Christmas Day. So now this is the beginning of February. Hermione has spent 4 to 5 full weeks in the hospital wing. On her first evening back in Gryffindor Tower, Harry showed her T.M. Riddle's diary and told her the story of how they found it. "Ooh, it might have hidden powers," said Hermione, enthusiastically, taking the diary and looking at it closely. "If it has, it's hiding them very well," said Ron. "Maybe it's shy. I don't know why you don't chuck it, Harry." "I wish I knew why someone did try to chuck it," said Harry. "I wouldn't mind knowing how Riddle got an award for special services to Hogwarts either." "Could have been anything," said Ron. "Maybe he got 30 OWLs, or saved a teacher from the giant squid. Maybe he murdered Myrtle. That would have done everyone a favor." But Harry could tell from the arrested look on Hermione's face that she was thinking what he was thinking. "What?" said Ron, looking from one to the other. "Well, the Chamber of Secrets was opened 50 years ago, wasn't it?" he said. "That's what Malfoy said." "Well, yeah," said Ron slowly. "And this diary is 50 years old," said Hermione, tapping it excitedly. "So?" "Oh, Ron, wake up!" snapped Hermione. "We know the person who opened the chamber last time was expelled 50 years ago. We know T.M. Riddle got an award for special services to the school 50 years ago. Well, what if Riddle got his special award for catching the heir of Slytherin? His diary would probably tell us everything. Where the chamber is, and how to open it, and what sort of creature lives in it. The person who's behind the attacks this time wouldn't want that laying around, would they?" "That's a brilliant theory, Hermione," said Ron, "with just one little flaw. There's nothing written in this diary." But Hermione was pulling her wand out of her bag. "It might be invisible ink," she whispered. She tapped the diary 3 times and said, "Apparicium!" Nothing happened. Undaunted, Hermione shoved her hand back into her bag and pulled out what appeared to be a bright red eraser. "It's a revealer. I got it in Diagon Alley," she said. She rubbed hard on January 1st. Nothing happened. "I'm telling you, there's nothing to find in there," said Ron. "Riddle just got a diary for Christmas and he couldn't be bothered filling it in." Harry couldn't explain, even to himself, why he didn't just throw Riddle's diary away. The fact was that even though he knew the diary was blank, he kept absent-mindedly picking it up and turning the pages, as though it were a story he wanted to finish. And while Harry was sure he had never heard the name T.M. Riddle before, it still seemed to mean something to him, almost as though Riddle was a friend he'd had when he was very small, and had half forgotten. But this was absurd. He'd never had friends before Hogwarts. Dudley had made sure of that. Nevertheless, Harry was determined to find out more about Riddle. So, Next day at break, he headed for the trophy room to examine Riddle's special award, accompanied by an interested Hermione and a thoroughly unconvinced Ron, who told them he'd seen enough of the trophy room to last him a lifetime. Riddle's burnished gold shield was tucked away in a corner cabinet. It didn't carry details of why it had been given to him. Good thing, too, or it'd be even bigger, and I'd still be polishing it, said Ron. However, they did find Riddle's name on an old medal for magical merit, and on a list of old head boys. He sounds like Percy, said Ron, wrinkling his nose in disgust. Perfect prefect head boy. Probably top of every class. You say that like it's a bad thing, said Hermione in a slightly hurt voice. And again, here we have a line break, so it would be a good time for you to stop, jot something down in your notes. Again, think about what Harry, Ron, and Hermione are doing. Okay? I would be writing down something about how Harry, Ron, and Hermione are trying to find out more information about this person who is T.M. Riddle. Alright, I'm on page 298. The sun had now begun to shine weakly at Hogwarts again. Inside the castle, the mood had grown more hopeful. There had been no more attacks since those on Justin and nearly headless Nick, and Madame Pomfrey was pleased to report that the mandrakes were becoming moody and secretive, meaning that they were fast leaving childhood. Alright, and again, I know that we just said write something in your notes, but here, again, you should add something into your notes. J.K. Rowling in this one short paragraph tells us something really important. Okay? There have been no more attacks since Justin and nearly headless Nick. And so, again, you should add that into your notes. Because now it's been months, all right? It's been several months where things are quiet, all right? There haven't been any attacks since slightly before Christmas time. Remember, it was Halloween time when I think it was Colin that got petrified. It was shortly after that, so we're probably in November when the last attacks have happened. So it's been pretty quiet in December and January. So the attacks have kind of stopped here now at Hogwarts. The moment their acne clears up, they'll be ready for repotting again, Harry heard her telling Filch kindly one afternoon. And after that, it won't be long until we're cutting them up and stewing them. You'll have Mrs. Norris back in no time. Perhaps the heir of Slytherin had lost his or her nerve, thought Harry. It must be getting riskier and riskier to open the Chamber of Secrets, with the school so alert and suspicious. Perhaps the monster, whatever it was even now settling itself down to hibernate for another 50 years. Ernie Macmillan of Hufflepuff didn't take this cheerful view. He was still convinced that Harry was the guilty one, that he had given himself away at the dueling club. Peeves wasn't helping matters. He kept popping up in the crowd corridor singing, "Oh, Potter, you rotter," now with a dance routine to match. Gilderoy Lockhart seemed to think he, himself, had made the attacks stop. Harry overheard him telling Professor McGonagall so while the Gryffindors were lining up for Transfiguration. "I don't think there'll be any more attacks or any more trouble, Minerva," he said, tapping his nose knowingly and winking. "I think the chamber has been locked for good this time. The culprit must have known it was only a matter of time before I caught him. Rather sensible to stop now before I came down too hard on him. You know what the school needs is a morale booster. Wash away the memories of last term. I won't say any more just now, but I think I know just the thing." He tapped his nose again and strode off. Lockhart's idea of a morale booster became clear at breakfast time on February 14th. Again, think, what is February 14th? Harry hadn't much sleep because of a late running Quidditch practice the night before, and he hurried down the Great Hall, slightly late. He thought for a moment that he'd walked through the wrong doors. The walls were all covered with large, lurid pink flowers. Worse still, heart-shaped confetti was falling from the pale blue ceiling. Harry went over to the Gryffindor table where Ron was sitting, looking sickened, and Hermione seemed to have been overcome with giggles. "What's going on?" Harry asked them, sitting down and wiping confetti off of his bacon. Ron pointed to the teacher's table, apparently too disgusted to speak. Lockhart, wearing lurid pink robes to match the decorations, was waving for silence. The teachers on either side of him were looking stony-faced from where he sat. Harry could see a muscle going in Professor McGonagall's cheek. Snape looked as though someone had just fed him a large beaker of Skelegro. "Happy Valentine's Day!" Lockhart shouted. "And may I thank the 46 people who have so far sent me cards. Yes, I have taken the liberty of arranging this little surprise for you all. And it doesn't end here." Lockhart clapped his hand, and through the doors to the entrance hall marched a dozen surly-looking dwarves. Not just any dwarves, however. Lockhart had them all wearing golden wings and carrying harps. My friendly card-carrying cupids," beamed Lockhart. "They will be moving around the school today, delivering your valentines. And the fun doesn't stop here. I'm sure my colleagues will want to enter into the spirit of the occasion. Why not ask Professor Snape to show you how to whip up a love potion? And while you're at it, Professor Flitwick knows more about entrancing enchantments than any wizard I've ever met. That sly old dog." Professor Flitwick buried his face in his hands. Snape was looking as though the first person to ask him for a love potion would be force-fed poison. "Please, Hermione, tell me you weren't one of the 46, said Ron as they left the Great Hall for their first lesson. Hermione suddenly became very interested in searching her bag for her schedule, and she didn't answer. All day long, the dwarves kept banging into their classes to deliver valentines, to the annoyance of the teachers. And late that afternoon, as the Gryffindors were walking upstairs for charms, one of the dwarves caught up with Harry. "Oi, you! Harry Potter!" shouted a particularly grim-looking dwarf, elbowing people out of his way to get to Harry. Hot all over at the thought of being given a valentine in front of a line of first years, which happened to include Ginny Weasley, Harry tried to escape. The dwarf, however, cut his way through the crowd by kicking people's shins, and reached him before he'd gone 2 paces. "I've got a musical message to deliver to Harry Potter in person," he said, twanging his harp in a threatening sort of way. "Not here," Harry hissed, trying to escape. "Stay still," grunted the dwarf, grabbing hold of Harry's bag and pulling him back. "Let me go," Harry snarled, tugging. With a loud ripping noise, his bag split in 2. His books, wand, parchment, and quills spilled onto the floor, and his ink bottle smashed over everything. Harry scrambled around trying to pick it all up before the dwarf started singing, causing something of a holdup in the corridor. "What's going on here?" came the cold, drawling voice of Draco Malfoy. Harry started stuffing everything feverishly into his ripped bag, desperate to get away before Malfoy could hear his musical valentine. "What's all the commotion?" said another familiar voice as Percy Weasley arrived. Losing his head, Harry tried to make a run for it, but the dwarf seized him around the knees and brought him crashing to the floor. "Right," he said, sitting on Harry's ankle. "Here is your singing green as a fresh pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine. He's really divine. The hero who conquered the Dark Lord." Harry would have given all the gold in Gringotts to evaporate on the spot. Trying valiantly, I'm going to go ahead and underline that word, to laugh along with everyone else, he got up, his feet numb from the weight of the dwarf, as Percy Weasley did his best to disperse the crowd. some of whom were crying with mirth. In that paragraph alone, I underlined valiantly, disperse, and mirth. So I've got 3 words just from that one little paragraph. Off you go! Off you go! The bell rang 5 minutes ago. Off to class now, he said, shooing some of the younger students away. And you, Malfoy. Harry, glancing over, saw Malfoy stoop and snatch up something. Leering, he showed it to Crabbe and Goyle, and Harry realized that he'd got Riddle's diary. Give that back, said Harry quietly. Wonder what Potter's written in this, said Malfoy, who obviously hadn't noticed the year on the cover, and thought he had Harry's own diary. A hush fell over the onlookers. Ginny was staring from the diary to Harry, looking terrified. Hand it over, Malfoy, said Percy sternly. When I've had a look, said Malfoy, waving the diary tauntingly at Harry. Percy said, as a school prefect, but Harry had lost his temper. He pulled out his wand and shouted, Expelliarmus! And just as Snape had disarmed Lockhart, so Malfoy found the diary shooting out of his hand into the air. Ron, grinning broadly, caught it. Harry, said Percy loudly. No magic in the corridors. I'll have to report this, you know. But Harry didn't care. He was one up on Malfoy, and that was worth 5 points from Gryffindor any day. Malfoy was looking furious, and as Ginny passed him to enter her classroom, he yelled spitefully after her, I don't think Potter liked your Valentine much. Ginny covered her face with her hands and ran into class. Snarling, Ron pulled out his wand too, but Harry pulled him away. Ron didn't need to spend the whole of Charms belching slugs. It wasn't until they had reached Professor Flitwick's class that Harry noticed something rather odd about Riddle's diary. All his other books were drenched in scarlet ink. The diary, however, was as clean as it had been before the ink bottle had smashed all over it. He tried to point this out to Ron, but Ron was having trouble with his wand again. Large purple bubbles were blossoming out the end, and he wasn't much interested in anything else. And here's where you should go ahead and add some things to your notes. Okay, you guys can see here, Draco gets the diary. Harry casts a spell onto Draco. Harry notices that the diary, although it was soaked with ink, it doesn't have any ink on it. Okay, this is going to be important. Again, how Harry figures out how to use this diary ultimately will be important for you guys to know. All right, that when Harry's books spill all over the ground and ink spills all over his books, he notices that all of his books have ink on them except for the diary. The diary is pristine, he calls it. There's no marks on it at all from the ink spill. Okay, I'm on page 305. We got about 10 pages left in the chapter. Harry went to bed before anyone else in his dormitory that night. This was partly because he didn't think he could stand Fred and George singing, "His eyes are as green as a fresh pickled toad," one more time, and partly because he wanted to examine Riddle's diary again, and knew that Ron thought he was wasting his time. Harry sat on his 4-poster and flicked through the blank pages, not one of which had a trace of scarlet ink on it. Then he pulled a new bottle out of his bedside cabinet, dipped his quill into it, and dropped a blot onto the first page of the diary. The ink shone brightly on the paper for a second, and then, as though it was being sucked into the page, vanished. Excited, Harry loaded up his quill a second time and wrote, "My name is Harry Potter." The words shone momentarily on the page, and they too sank away without trace. Then, at last, something happened. Oozing black out of the page in his very own ink came words Harry had never written. "Hello, Harry Potter. My name is Tom Riddle. How did you come by my diary?" These words, too, faded away, but not before Harry had started to scribble back. "Someone tried to flush it down a toilet." He waited eagerly for Riddle's reply. Lucky that I recorded my memories in some more lasting way than ink, but I always knew that there would be those who would not want this diary read. What do you mean? Harry scrawled, blotting the page in his excitement. I mean that this diary holds memories of terrible things, things that were covered up, things that happened at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. That's where I am now, Harry wrote quickly. I'm at Hogwarts, and horrible stuff's been happening. Do you know anything about the Chamber of Secrets? Now remember, way back in the second chapter, Dobby warned Harry that terrible things are going to be happening at Hogwarts. And now Harry is in chapter 13, so we're talking 11 chapters later, and Harry is talking about the terrible things that are happening. His heart was hammering. Riddle's reply came quickly. His writing became untidier, as though he was hurrying to tell all he knew. Of course I know about the Chamber of Secrets. In my day they told us it was a legend, that it did not exist, but this was a lie. In my 5th year, the chamber was opened and the monster attacked several students, finally killing one. I caught the person who opened the chamber, and he was expelled. But the headmaster, Professor Dibbit, ashamed that such a thing had happened at Hogwarts, forbade me to tell the truth. A story was given out that the girl had died in a freak accident. They gave me a nice, shiny, engraved trophy for my trouble, and warned me to keep my mouth shut. But I knew it could happen again. The monster lived on, and the one who had the power to release it was not imprisoned. Harry nearly upset his ink bottle in his hurry to write back. It's happening again now. There have been 3 attacks, and no one seems to know who's behind them. Who was it last time? I can show you if you like, came Riddle's reply. You don't have to take my word for it. I can take you inside my memory of the night when I caught him. Harry hesitated, his quill suspended over the diary. What did Riddle mean? How could he be taken inside somebody else's memory? He glanced nervously at the door to the dormitory, which was growing dark. When he looked back at the diary, he saw fresh words forming. Let me show you. Harry paused for a fraction of a second and then wrote 2 letters. Okay. Alright, so this is again, another good spot to write down something on your notes here. Okay? Harry notices about the diary. He tries writing in the diary to see what happens. The diary writes back to Harry. Riddle offers to show Harry his memories of 50 years ago. So here we are at a very pivotal point. Okay, T.M. Riddle is about to show Harry how he caught the heir of Slytherin 50 years ago. This is at that point where we should be on the edge of our seat, excited to finally read and figure out who is the heir of Slytherin. Page 308. The pages of the diary began to blow as though caught in a high wind, stopping halfway through the month of June. Mouth hanging open, Harry saw that the little square for June 13th seemed to have turned into a minuscule television screen. His hands trembling slightly, he raised the book to press his eye against the little window, and before he knew what was happening, he was tilted forward. The window was widening. He felt his body leave his bed, and he was pitching head first through the opening in the page onto a whirl of color and shadow. He felt his feet hit solid ground and stood shaking as the blurred shapes around him came suddenly into focus. He knew immediately where he was. This circular room with the sleeping portraits was Dumbledore's office. But it wasn't Dumbledore who was sitting behind the desk. A wizened, frail-looking wizard, bald except for a few wisps of white hair, was reading a letter by candlelight. Harry had never seen this man before. "I'm sorry," he said shakily. "I don't mean to butt in." But the wizard didn't look up. He continued to read, frowning slightly. Harry drew nearer to his desk and stammered, I'll just go, shall I?" Still, the wizard ignored him. He didn't seem even to have heard him. Thinking that the wizard might be deaf, Harry raised his voice. "Sorry I disturbed you. I'll go now," he half shouted. The wizard folded up the letter with a sigh, stood up, walked past Harry without glancing at him, and went to draw the curtains at his window. The sky outside the window was ruby red. It seemed to be sunset. The wizard went back to the desk, sat down, and twiddled his thumbs, watching the door. Harry looked around the office. No Fawkes the Phoenix. No whirring silver contraptions. This was Hogwarts as Riddle had known it, meaning that this unknown wizard was headmaster, not Dumbledore. And he, Harry, was little more than a phantom, completely invisible to the people of 50 years ago. There was a knock on the office door. "Enter," said the old wizard in a feeble voice. A boy of about 16 entered, taking off his pointed hat. A silver prefect's badge was glinting on his chest. He was much taller than Harry, but he too had jet black hair. "Ah, Riddle," said the headmaster. "You wanted to see me, Professor Dibbit?" said Riddle. He looked nervous. "Sit down," said Dibbit. I've just been reading this letter you sent me." "Oh," said Riddle. He sat down, gripping his hands together very tightly. "My dear boy," said Dibbit kindly, "I cannot possibly let you stay at school over the summer. Surely you want to go home for the holidays?" "No," said Riddle at once. "I'd much rather stay here at Hogwarts than go back to that... You live in a Muggle orphanage during the holidays, I believe," said Dibbit, curiously. "Yes, sir," said Riddle, reddening slightly. "You're Muggle-born?" "Half-blood, sir," said Riddle. "Muggle father. Witch mother." "And are both your parents?" "My mother died just after I was born, sir. They told me at the orphanage she lived just long enough to name me. Tom, after my father. Marvolo, after my grandfather." Dibbit clucked his tongue sympathetically. "The thing is, Tom," he sighed, "special arrangements might have been made for you, but in the current circumstances—" "You mean all of these attacks, sir," said Riddle, and Harry's heart leapt, and he moved closer, scared of missing anything. "Precisely," said the headmaster. "My dear boy, you must see how foolish it would be of me to allow you to remain at the castle when term ends, particularly in light of the recent tragedy, the death of that poor little girl. You will be safer by far at your orphanage. As a matter of fact, the Ministry of Magic is even now talking about closing the school. We are no nearer locating the source of all this unpleasantness." Okay, this would be a good spot for you to stop, add stuff to your notes here. Okay, Harry goes into Tom Riddle's memory. He is now in the headmaster's office, which is Professor Dibbit, and he is watching Tom ask Professor Dibbit if he can stay there for the summer. We also learn about Tom Riddle that he is half-blood. He is Muggle-born. His parents are both dead, and he lives in an orphanage when he's not at Hogwarts. So again, this is stuff we're learning about a new character. All right, we have a new character, TM, or now we know him as Tom Riddle. And so it's important that we write down information about this character. Okay, I'm on the top of page 311. "Precisely," said the headmaster. "My dear boy, you must see how foolish it would be of me to allow you to remain at the castle when term ends, particularly in light of the recent tragedy, the death of that poor little girl." And again, here, I know I read this before already, but we're getting confirmation that a person did die. A student died the last time the chamber was open. "You will be safer by far at your orphanage. As a matter of fact, the Ministry of Magic is even now talking about closing the school. We are no nearer locating the source of all this unpleasantness." Riddle's eyes had widened. "Sir, if the person was caught, if it all stopped..." "What do you mean?" said Dibbit, with a squeak in his voice, sitting up in his chair. "Riddle, do you mean you know something about these tacks?" "No, sir," said Riddle quickly. But Harry was sure it was the same sort of "no" that he himself had given Dumbledore. Dibbit sank back, looking faintly disappointed. "You may go, Tom." Riddle slid off of his chair and slouched out of the room. Harry followed him. Down the moving spiral staircase they went, emerging next to the gargoyle in the darkening corridor. Riddle stopped, and so did Harry. Watching him, Harry could tell that Riddle was doing some serious thinking. He was biting his lip, his forehead furrowed. Then, as though he had suddenly reached a decision, he hurried off, Harry gliding noiselessly behind him. They didn't see another person until they reached the entrance hall, when a tall wizard with long, sweeping auburn hair and a beard called to Riddle from the marble staircase. "What are you doing, wandering around this late, Tom?" Harry gaped at the wizard. He was none other than a 50-year younger Dumbledore. "I had to see the headmaster, sir," said Riddle. "Well, hurry off to bed," said Dumbledore, giving Riddle exactly the kind of penetrating stare Harry knew so well. "Best not to roam the corridors these days, not since—" He sighed heavily, bade Riddle good night, and strode off. Riddle watched him walk out of sight, and then, moving quickly, headed straight down the stone steps to the dungeons, with Harry in hot pursuit. But to Harry's disappointment, Riddle led him not into a hidden passageway or a secret tunnel, but to the very dungeon in which Harry had potions with Snape. The torches hadn't been lit, and when Riddle pushed the door almost closed, Harry could only just see him, standing stock still by the door, watching the passage outside. It felt to Harry that they were there for at least an hour. All he could see was the figure of Riddle at the door, staring through the crack, waiting like a statue. And just when Harry had stopped feeling expectant and tense, and started wishing he could return to the present, he heard something move beyond the door. Someone was creeping along the passage. He heard whoever it was pass the dungeon where he and Riddle were hidden. Riddle, quiet as a shadow, edged through the door and followed, Harry tiptoeing behind him, forgetting that he couldn't be heard. For perhaps 5 minutes they followed the footsteps, until Riddle stopped suddenly, his head inclined in the direction of the new noises. Harry heard a door creak open, and then someone speaking in a hoarse whisper. "Come on, gotta get you out of here. Come on now, in the box." There was something familiar about that voice. Riddle suddenly jumped around the corner. Harry stepped out behind him. He could see the dark outline of a huge boy who was crouching in front of an open door, a very large box next to it. "Evening, Rubeus," said Riddle sharply. The boy slammed the door shut and stood up. "What are you doing down here, Tom?" Riddle stepped closer. "It's all over," he said. "I'm gonna have to turn you in, Rubeus. They're talking about closing Hogwarts if the attacks don't stop." "What do you? I don't think you meant to kill anyone. But monsters don't make good pets. I suppose you just let it out for exercise, and—" "It never killed no one," said the large boy, backing against the closed door. From behind him, Harry could hear a funny rustling and clicking. "Come on, Rubeus," said Riddle, moving yet closer. "The dead girl's parents will be here tomorrow. The least Hogwarts can do is make sure that the thing that killed their daughter is slaughtered." "It wasn't him!" roared the boy, his voice echoing in the dark passage. "He wouldn't! He never!" "Stand aside," said Riddle, drawing out his wand. His spell lit the corridor with a sudden flaming light. The door behind the large boy flew open with such force it knocked him into the wall opposite, and out of it came something that made Harry let out a long, piercing scream, unheard by anyone. A vast, low-slung, hairy body, and a tangle of black legs, a gleam of many eyes, and a pair of razor-sharp pincers. Riddle raised his wand again, but he was too late. The thing bowled him over as it scuttled away, tearing up the corridor and out of sight. Riddle scrambled to his feet, looking after it. He raised his wand, but the huge boy leapt on him, seized his wand, and threw him back down, yelling, "No!" The scene whirled. The darkness became complete. Harry felt himself falling, and, with a crash, he landed spread-eagled on his four-poster in the Gryffindor dormitory. Riddle's diary lay open on his stomach. Before he had had time to regain his breath, the dormitory door opened, and Ron came in. "There you are," he said. Harry sat up. He was sweating and shaking. "What's up?" said Ron, looking at him with concern. "It was Hagrid! Hagrid, Ron! Hagrid opened the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago!" And that's where the chapter ends. So, take a moment right now. Write this last piece of information in your notes. Harry ends up going into Tom Riddle's diary, and Tom Riddle shows him how he captures Hagrid. Now, it doesn't tell you what the monster is, but by that description, when he talks about the pincers, the legs, you guys can make the inference that this was some kind of giant spider that Hagrid had. At least from that description, it sounds like he's describing a spider. So Tom Riddle catches Hagrid with the monster. All right, and we see Hagrid saying, "It wasn't him, it wasn't him." But we also know that Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts 50 years ago, and we know that Hagrid, actually, I take that back. We don't know that it was 50 years ago. We do know that Hagrid was expelled, and that Hagrid, technically speaking, is not supposed to do magic because he's not a fully qualified wizard. Remember, he was expelled. Okay, so take some time, add those things to your notes. Things are really heating up right now. If we think about the hero's journey, again, the obstacles for Harry as he is on his road of trials keep getting harder and harder, scarier and scarier, to the point where in this chapter it looks like one of Harry's own mentors, Hagrid, is the one that might be responsible for the attacks from 50 years ago, and that means that he's possibly the one responsible for the attacks now that are happening. So, there's lots of great discussion questions here for you guys to think about. We will have a discussion in class tomorrow about these questions, but right now, you guys can feel free to take some time to think about them. What do Harry and Ron find in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom? This is, of course, a level 1 question. There's one answer, and it comes right out of the text. Who does this item belong to? And again, by now, this name should be in your notes. I cannot emphasize that enough. Okay? Harry and Ron find a diary. The diary belongs to TM, or Tom Marvolo Riddle. Lockhart celebrates Valentine's Day by having these little dwarves singing Valentines out to all the kids. Who sends Harry a Valentine? Now, you got to do a little bit of making an inferences because it doesn't come right out and tell you. But we can take a second and think who was the person that sent Harry that Valentine. How does Harry figure out how to work the diary? And again, this is important. That scene where the ink spills all over the diary, and all of the books have ink on them except for the diary, which gives Harry the idea of maybe writing in the book, and somehow the ink would become invisible, which is exactly what happens. Sorry about that. What does Harry learn from TM Riddle when he uses the diary? Again, that just happened right there at the very end. What is the creature that was thought to be the monster from the Chamber of Secrets? Who opened the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago? This is all part of what Harry learns. And then, the last question is probably the best question to really consider and to really reflect upon. If you were Harry, how would you react to the news about Hagrid? Alright, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow we will be doing our quiz, we will be doing our summary, and of course we'll begin class by once again talking about these discussion questions. So right now, make sure that you finish your notes, head on over here to the Google Classroom, scroll down under the Unit 3 assignments, go to your Chapter 13 notes, open that up, and make sure that you guys upload a picture for me so I can give you guys credit for your class work. Alright, I look forward to doing the writing with you guys tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to continuing reading the next chapter, which is going to be called Cornelius Fudge. Alright, and we'll leave it at that. I'll leave you guys with that to think about. Okay, who is Cornelius Fudge? Alright, so you guys have a great afternoon, have a great evening, and until I see you next time, stay safe. Bye-bye.
Oh my gosh, what was that?